Talk now to Ehud Barak, who is the former Prime Minister of Israel. Mr. Barak, thank you for joining us on TalkTV this morning.
Thank you for having me.
I wonder what your reaction is to the withdrawal of the vast majority of Israeli troops from the southern part of Gaza. That is perhaps a question that many people will have, especially when the Israeli government was thinking and talking a lot about an invasion of Rafah and defeating Hamas that way. What's your reaction?
It's the right step at the right time. It's clear that Rafah operation, if and when it opens, it might take several weeks because, first of all, we have to make sure that at least a majority of the million refugees from the northern part of the Gaza Strip who came to Rafah at the southern part will be moved in a way that will enable a massive operation. Then the operation itself may take several months. So basically, it's a matter of months, several months. So it tells you that the time is ripe now to probably have a deal with the hostages to release them, because there are now probably less than 80 of them still alive, and they won't survive there for another few months. So I see the most probable or most preferred process as having a ceasefire for several weeks, having an exchange of hostages, and then there will be of we have highly responsible, top quality guys, the head of Mossad, the head of Secret Service, and a former general. They are as serious as the government. They should be given a wide mandate to bring the best possible deal they can get at referendum, and the government will decide. I reject the idea that we should know in advance that the Hamas accepting what we want before we go and resume serious negotiations.
How stable do you think your successor, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is at the moment? Because there are many people who, there's a huge amount of opposition, not least from hostages' families within Israel. People say that he is perhaps hanging on, that he should call an election. Some people say that shouldn't happen when Israel is at war. You're a former Labour Prime Minister in Israel. You're obviously an opponent of Benjamin Netanyahu. But what is your assessment of the situation?
Look, I envy the UK. If this a similar event would have happened in the UK, the Prime Minister would resign on the October 8th, at most at the evening, and if he would not do it on his own, the leaders of his own party would call him to the proper club, and at the end of the lunch, he would announce that he decided to resign. But Israel has a different norm, so he tries to maneuver to survive. I should tell you honestly that about half of the public of Israel thinks different than myself, that then he should stay until the end of the war. But 4 out of 5 Israeli totally lost trust in Netanyahu and see him as the main responsible for this whole blunder, the most severe blunder in our history. And 3 out of 4 adults wanting to resign, about half of them saying immediately and other half after the war. But we don't think of wars of many years. In Israel, wars are something very short usually. The most successful one we had took 6 days, some 55 years ago, and the most demanding one, some 50 years ago, took less than 3 weeks.
Yes.
So basically, he lost the trust and he has to resign, but political mechanism is very complicated and subtle in Israel. So it's not clear when exactly it will happen, but I believe that in the coming months we'll have election.
You think you'll have an election and you think Benjamin Netanyahu will lose that and be out of office? That's what you think will happen?
I'm confident that if election will happen before even a year passed since the blunder of October 7th, namely before October this year, he will lose for sure. He will not survive it. But if he stays somehow manipulatively for another year from now or more than a year, you cannot tell for sure.
Mr. Barak, it's interesting that you called the 7th of October one of the most severe blunder in Israel's history, and that a lot of people hold Benjamin Netanyahu responsible for that. Tell us why they hold him responsible for it, because it's 6 months on, it was perpetrated by Hamas terrorists, yet a lot of the blame, of course, has gone to Benjamin Netanyahu. Just tell us the original thoughts around that and how that's developed over the last 6 months.
You know, it was the October 7th was the worst day in our history as a nation. It never happened in one day since probably the Holocaust, since the closing of Auschwitz, that so many Jews were killed in a single day. And it happened in a place that had been established to start with, to begin with, in order to become a place where Jews can go to sleep at Friday night and being assured that they will not be kind of wake up in the morning to be slaughtered or raped or mutilated or whatever. And the victims were most of them civilians, elderly people, babies, women, sick people. It was terrible. So it's the worst blunder, literally. It's the equivalent of the UK losing in one morning on your own soil the life of, let's say, probably 12 or 15,000 Brits. And, you know, so I see it as by far the worst. But since then, even the running of the war was, in my judgment, was very kind of courageously and devoted sacrifice of fighter at the front. Some almost 300 of them were killed since 7th of October, and another 300 or more in 7th of October. I mean soldiers, not citizens or civilians. And but the results, the objectives of a war are far from being completed even now. So we opened with very wide-scale operation in Gaza, and later on in the center, and the last in Khan Younis, which is more to the south.
Yes.
But basically, Hamas is still there. Its military capability has not been eliminated, and the hostages are still there. So we are far from reaching our objective, and very harsh critique from members of the war cabinet, two generals who joined from the opposition, and some of the people in the service, in uniform and in public service, heavy criticized of Netanyahu for not taking any decisions. You know, it's Israel has not yet set a clear objective, clear vision for the morning after. There is an old Roman saying, if you don't know which port you want to reach, no wind will take you there.
Yes.
And we have not yet done even this. We are creating a major crisis in the United States.
That's what I want to ask you, Mr. Barak, that's what I want to ask you about in terms of the United States, because there will be some who will say that this withdrawal, or almost total withdrawal from the southern part of Gaza, is actually because of American pressure. We've had a big row in the UK this week after those aid workers were killed by Israeli drones. Of course, Israel has apologized, and there have been many military personnel who've been dismissed from their posts and so on. But nonetheless, there is a debate here in the United Kingdom about selling military provisions and arms and so on to Israel. Is international pressure getting to Benjamin Netanyahu, and should he listen to it?
I think that he feels the pressure and probably acts upon this pressure, but basically he's doing something that I, for example, many others argued from day one, that if a Israeli prime minister has to make a choice, and it's a binary choice, are you going with the United States, with this axis of moderates facing the axis of rogue states, Iran and Syria and the Hamas and the Hezbollah in Lebanon and Houthis in Yemen and so on? Do we say yes but to the Americans and join them, or do we choose to go with those messianic racist extreme ministers in his government, which has messianic visions that have nothing to do with the interests of Israel? I had a clear perception. We should join hands with the Americans and establish a common vision to the morning after, takes into account our security demands and other things, but deploying a multinational Arab force for several months there and bring the Palestinian Authority, improve Palestinian Authority. And Netanyahu rejected it, not because of the interest of Israel, but because of his personal interest. He is dependent upon these racist, messianic, Michiganers, I call them in Yiddish, nuts, minister, and they are dictating to him policies that are against the interests of Israel, but protect his coalition. So in a way, he prefers his personal survivability as the prime minister over the explicit interests of the country. And unfortunately, we had not yet made it to defeat him. We expected the opposition to do it, but the opposition in Israel is too passive, so the role had passed to the public, and the public starts more and more furiously to demonstrate against the continuation of this situation.
I want to ask you about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, because Hamas statistics, I think we have to treat them with skepticism, but they say that tens of thousands of people have died in Gaza. What we do know for a fact is that the situation in Gaza, from a humanitarian perspective, is terrible for the people living there. There are innocent men, women and children who have been shelled, who've been bombed, who have been attacked by the Israeli military. It is a war. This is sadly what happens, and there has been a humanitarian catastrophe there. What should Israel's role be? How much ownership of that should it take in regard to the civilian casualties and problems in regard to this?
Look, it happened. It's in a way for them, it's a tragedy. Israel acted upon the compelling imperative to make sure that such an event will never, ever happen again, which means that we had to destroy both the reigning capabilities of Hamas as well its capacity to threaten Israel. And I don't think that even our government, which I'm a harsh critic of, thought that it's an ideal picture, so many civilians will be killed. But that's the result of a very tough and very kind of deliberate plan of Hamas to hide behind those.
But that's not the fault of the civilians. That's not the fault of the civilians, though, is it?
Repeat it, please.
That's not the fault of the civilians, of course. That's the fault of Hamas terrorists.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. It's not the civilians. It's not any. We cannot be happy of any individual who were killed who was not involved.
Of course.
But basically, when you look honestly at the causal chain that caused it, you see the Hamas using a template, a gun to the template of the temple of the public, holding them in the northern part of Gaza after we won once and again over weeks. Go to the south. We have in a tough clash with the Hamas, and we will use weapons, unfortunately.
Let me just ask you just finally, Ehud Barak, about what the comments of the Deputy Prime Minister here in the United Kingdom in regard to his belief that Israel is often held to a higher standard internationally, especially in this week. For example, he said there was almost a relish that it was okay in some people's minds to, or there was an excuse, I suppose. That's a crude way of describing it, and I wouldn't want to trivialise the deaths of 7 people, but there are times when certainly the Deputy Prime Minister has said that there is almost a relish that it's fine to criticise Israel for this. Do you feel that your country is held to a higher standard internationally than other countries? Do you feel that that is perhaps part of some level of anti-Semitism, or what do you think the reasons for that are?
This is a tragic event. Those people helped not just the Gaza, they helped Israelis who were kind of suffered after the 7th of October, and they deserve to be alive. It's a tragedy. There was a debriefing. 2 kind of senior officers were removed from power. Others were condemned by their superiors. But unfortunately, it cannot bring these innocent fighters for humanitarian cause cannot bring them back to life, and that's a real tragedy. We have to do whatever it takes to avoid any such event in the future, and we.
And civilian casualties is that just what happens in war? Do you think? Is that? I mean, many people will find that difficult to kind of square.
You seem to me to be too young to remember World War II, but I remember it as a very, very young kid. There in the wars, there are several cases that many civilians paid with their life for the tragic aspects of war. And of course, no one can be happy or celebrate it. But, and of course, we have to do everything to improve, especially if we operate in Rafah. It should be made sure that it cannot repeat itself with the same numbers of figures that happened in Gaza.
Yeah,
that's not simple, but I don't think that you find many Israelis who are happy with this. But it's unfortunate. It happened in war. I can only promise you next war there will be less kind of collateral damage or less other innocent people killed. But that cannot, it cannot compensate, cannot give anything to those who lost their life or lost their families there.